Welcome to the Inner Alignment Podcast, a neuroscience approach to healing anxiety and depression caused by childhood trauma stored in the body. With the right tools, healing long-term anxiety and depression is completely possible when you heal at root cause. Join me as we expand boundaries in the field of trauma recovery with the revolutionary Inner Alignment System, a 6-layered approach to addressing stored trauma in every layer of the body. Hi, and welcome back. We're in episode 3 today with the Inner Alignment for Childhood Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Kim Beekman, and today we're going to be talking about the first pillar of the Inner Alignment System, which is the soul retrieval process. So in the last episode, we were talking about the trauma packets and how trauma packets are stored in the body. Hopefully you have a really good understanding of what a trauma packet is coming into this episode. Otherwise, you may want to go back and listen. Today, joining me is Laura Killian and Misty Lamppa. Both are inner alignment practitioners. They're really advanced in the soul retrieval process. I'm so grateful to have both of you back.
Thanks. It's so great to be back here. It's just awesome to explore these topics and to put out there to the world what it is so we can build more awareness around this work that we're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I'm happy to be here and be back with everybody. Super passionate about this work and excited to expand and get it out to all the crevices on the planet. It's impactful and long lasting. So our mission is to get out as much as we can into the world. So thanks for letting me be here for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Laura. You know, through the Inner Alignment Organization and the Inner Alignment Foundation, the Childhood Trauma Foundation, we are really trying to get this information into mainstream, right? Into the mental health care system, into the yogic field, because this is based in Ayurvedic psychology. We're trying to get it into the hands of lay people, so to speak, so that people can start to recognize that they're not broken. They just may have some trauma packets in the body that's reverberating into the present moment. And that awareness of these trauma packets, these stored childhood trauma experiences that are auto-associated vibrations of thoughts and emotions and nervous system response that's stored in the body will reverberate into the present moment. Where we left off in the last episode is building awareness about these trauma packets, really starting to become acutely aware that we are so much more than this vibration of unworthiness or not enoughness that's reverberating into our relationships and our work environment and our politics and everywhere within our lives.
I think one of the hardest parts, Kim, is going through the work myself and then becoming an inner alignment practitioner and seeing the process and the repeatable process and the results of it. It makes it super challenging when you do see the trauma packets playing out in somebody in the present moment, from my closest loved ones to a complete stranger. That awareness you talk about, recognizing it in the grocery store with the parent that's super frustrated with the kid and the rage is coming in the adult and it's not who they are, and being able to see it and literally wanting to go shake people and say, it's just a trauma packet, it's not you, and it's healable, is probably the hardest, most challenging about knowing about the work, living the work, doing the work, and experiencing the work. For me anyways, to see it in the present moment.
That's really sweet.
Yeah, once you know that the anxiety or the depression or this issue that's showing up in life is really just a trauma packet, reverberating into the present moment. When we have that wisdom, it is really hard to watch people suffer in humanity and to bang up against the same issues over and over again. Because we can see it and we can be like, oh, that's really just a rejection trauma packet that's showing up, and you don't have to live with that. That can be healed in 2 months, and you can actually receive the love for the first time in your life. So it's such a profound gift that we have the privilege to receive. About 33 to 40% of the people who do this healing work or who receive healing through this work become practitioners of the work. And I think that's a really fascinating statistic, because I think when you've walked around feeling unworthy and broken most of your life, and then you realize, oh my gosh, healing's possible and it feels great, and it wasn't even that big of a deal to heal it. It's kind of like, oh, I need to help bring this into the world. I need to help be a part of the healing of humanity. And so we see a lot of people doing this work or being practitioners of the work after they experience it, even though they were, like Laura, you were a dental hygienist. I was a management consultant, right? Like most people who come in, we have nurses and all kinds of different backgrounds, lawyers and real estate folks, and just people from all backgrounds who, once they come into the deepest part of their healing, it profoundly and fundamentally changes everything.
It is such a testament to this work. I remember feeling like I would see that statement that says choose happy. And I'd be like, what do you mean choose happy? Don't you think we would if we could choose happy? Like if we could just flip a switch and choose it? And then going through this work, it is kind of easy. but, but it's not, right? It's hard work, but it's so simple when we get down to it. And I think that really, what that gives people, that gift that it gives people, that freedom of releasing them from their trauma packet and having the awareness, it makes people want to give that gift forward, to pay it forward and go into this work.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's a good segue. Let's talk a little bit about the soul retrieval process and what the process looks like. So we know that there's trauma packets stored in the body. We know that the soul retrieval process will change the embodied experience of the past trauma that's in the body. So what that means is the soul retrieval accesses that experience on every layer of the body and creates new awareness, new thoughts, new emotions, new nervous system responses, new energetic experiences. It brings in awareness in that experience that didn't have awareness. It brings in bliss into that past trauma that didn't have bliss. And so in that experience in the body, we can work every layer. And when we've done that, it's fundamentally changed, meaning it can never fire the way that it was auto associated in the same way again. It just feels different in that space. It was almost like at the time the trauma packet was formed, it was like balled up in aluminum foil and kind of crunched together inside. And through the experience of soul retrieval, we're essentially opening up that balled up aluminum foil and just really opening and creating spaciousness and consciousness and love and new thoughts and new feelings and new awarenesses, new ways of responding even in the childhood trauma experience. And because the trauma experience happened in the past, but it's being felt in the present moment, we can actually change the past experience in the body that's holding the past experience through being present in the experience at the current moment.
For me, I went through the Inner Alignment Soul Retrieval process personally before, like Misty said, before I became a practitioner and wanted to spread it out into the rest of humanity because of the impact. And after experiencing, talk therapy and experiencing Reiki and shamanic soul journeying and EMDR and all the different modalities which were valuable within themselves, this got to the core and the root by using that pattern that was playing out in the present moment and the vibration that I had been playing over and over and over and kind of really re-triggering, right? It's like a re-trigger of this little trauma packet, re-trigger, trigger again, and to be able to go in it and heal it at the root and have it processed on those different layers of the body sustained for me. And it really was one of the pillars that sustained, along with the other two of inner alignment. But I could feel the shift within my body. I could feel the change in my present moment life. And 8 years later, I still can feel the effects. So it's not like I've gone back and regressed into that same trigger firing. And so for me personally, but also what I've witnessed as a practitioner, is just the lasting impact of it. That, like you said, it doesn't fire the same way anymore. It can't. It's
Right.
healed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really incredible. So I think what you said is important. The current life situations are our pathway into the trauma packet. It's our access point into the trauma packet. And I think that, as Misty said in the last episode, some people might come in and be like, I've got this big trauma. I've got, my husband was a narcissist and my whole world fell apart. Or I have this big sexual trauma that happened to me when I was 15, and I want to work that trauma. And that's not really how this work works. We don't really go fishing around for traumas, old traumas, because we don't know if underneath the issue with the husband and the divorce is actually related to that sexual trauma. It could be, but it also could just be that you didn't get a cupcake at a birthday party and everybody else did, and nobody saw that you were without the cupcake. And these are real examples that we give of like small t traumas. So we always start with the current life issue. And that's the fourth dimension consciousness that we're talking about, the mind and the duality and this, he did this and this hurt and she did this and I was upset, right? So whatever upset is happening in the present moment, that's our gateway into the trauma packet. Those are really important experiences, the resistance, the contrast, the railing up against the same problem, and all of the emotion in present moment. That's what gives us access to the trauma packets. In fact, some of the harder clients that we have are the ones that have done so much EMDR that they don't have the reactivity anymore. They're less reactive, but there's a whole rabbit hole of deeply held sensation and angst and lack of joy and lack of happiness. And so we know deep within the structure of the body, there's an issue because they're still not able to manifest what they desire. They're still not able to get happiness in the relationship, but their reactivity has been almost like covered over, like the hole at the top of the surface has been covered up. And so what we have to do is really find that reactivity and the emotional fear of whether that's worry and anxiety or anger or sadness or grief, whatever that is, being able to get in touch with that negative thought and emotion in the present moment is our gateway into the trauma packet. So we call that the fourth dimension, really being able to amplify the experience and explore the fear in the present moment. A lot of people have spiritually bypassed it, or they've put a little understanding, like they know, and so they have a hard time actually accessing the current moment issue. And so just even getting back to the basics of what's bothering you, what emotion are you having in the present moment? Where do you feel that in the body right here, right now? That's really the first piece of the soul retrieval process, which is getting the thought and emotion activated in the body. So just talking about the issue can stir up the feelings, or really going into the worst part of the current life situation is how we do that. Once we do that, we can get into sensation in the body. And as we said when we were talking about trauma packets last episode, that sensation is not random. Where the person feels it in the body will correlate to the core unworthiness that's being stored in the body. So emotion, there's feeling in the body when there's negative emotion.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes a little amping that up if the person has spent their whole life quieting that emotion, right? Or suppressing that, or they've learned how to do a workaround or a safety of it. It's really sometimes a little bit like, come on, I know it's in there, because they've set their whole life up to cover that emotion, to not feel that scary sensation in their body.
Oh, that's such a great point. Like people who don't like being around other people or have social anxiety will just set their lives up so they don't interact with anyone, so they don't have to feel that feeling of disconnection out in the world. And so when they come to us and they've been kind of isolated for the last 15 years and they won't have triggers that are bothering them because they've isolated themselves from the triggers, or they've created a comfort around that. That's true. That actually brings up people who use marijuana throughout the day to ground themselves artificially, right? Or to create more ease, or people who are using alcohol to help cope. I remember having a traumatic experience where, this is not funny. My 2-year-old, I was at a pool with my 3 toddlers, and my 2-year-old was on the other side. I thought she had the life vest on, and I look over and she's like literally bobbing up and down and she's about to drown, like really devastating. And my whole nervous system appropriately went into fight or flight, and I got her, and then she had to choke up the water. It was a really devastating trauma that I went through in my 30s. And I looked at the other mom who was there, and I was like really just trying to calm myself down, regulate my nervous system, bring myself back into the moment. I was trying to process the trauma. And I looked over and I'm like, how are you doing? Like that, it was in her pool. And she's like, well, I'm going to need a couple extra glasses of wine tonight to deal with that. And it was in that moment, because I haven't drank in like 15 years, that I was like, oh, right. That trauma is not going to get processed, because the workaround of a couple of extra glasses of wine is what's going to help her kind of just repress that experience, store it somewhere as an adult, and then have the reverberation of that throughout the week or the month, because it was never really emotionally, mentally, physically processed. So whatever workaround, like Laura just mentioned, whether it's using substance to numb a vibration that we just can't process or don't know how to process, or we've put a story in our head of how it was supposed to be that way, or how actually it's not happening as bad, or whatever we're doing to cope as a child or as an adult.
Yeah, I was going to add in too, because sometimes we can look at those things and they look at it's negative, alcohol, marijuana, we might see that as negative, but there's things that we look at as healthy or positive that are doing the same thing, like constantly going on a run to get rid of the feeling in your body, or putting on music so that we don't have to feel or hear what's happening in our body. So or always just things like that that we might look at as healthy, but are helping us escape the feeling so that we can feel better momentarily, but it's not getting rid of the pattern and it's not addressing the trauma.
So all of those coping mechanisms, if we go back to the first episode, there's a fire in the basement of the house, there's smoke coming up into the upper floors. And so those coping mechanisms of taking the run or vaping or whatever someone's habit is, blows the smoke out of the upper floors, but it doesn't ever put the fire out. And so if someone's been in heavy duty coping mode, they may not feel the current life issue. They may not even feel the emotion, because they've dedicated their life to not having to feel. And we do see that a lot, don't we?
Yeah, and we see it with food, we see it with excessive talking, can't be in stillness, can't be in quiet, sex, hiking, over excessive, just to quiet the vibration, which is a sensation. And I know it feels terrible, but to us, learning what it is, it's a sensation in the present moment.
Yeah. So someone comes in, they want to do soul retrieval. They start off in their 2-month process. And in the soul retrieval, what we tell them is, we're going to go into the fear in your body. Your mind is going to want to be a part of this. In fact, as soon as we get you into the trauma packet, you're going to pop into your head or into your mental body and want to look at it and analyze it and connect the dots, because that's what someone's healing process typically has been like most of their life. But once we get them into sensation, we can feel sensation in terms of pressure, temperature, movement. So once we get them into those sensations, and we can talk a little bit about what they are, I mentioned them last time, it gives us a sense of like what the theme of the issue is. So just like those two twins, the trauma hit and was internalized and stored as different themes in their lives. One, it felt like they didn't have control. One felt like they weren't safe, right? And so those get stored, felt, and experienced differently. So if someone doesn't feel seen or heard, they might feel like they have a lump and pressure in their throat, or they might feel a squeezing around their throat.
Yeah, pressure in the chest to near the heart area, feeling the anxiety kicking up, or I'm not okay, or somebody's coming to get me, right? And so,
Right. So it'll be a squeezing of the heart or pressure on that, or like a heaviness in the heart is like, I'm not loved. I don't have love. I'm not cared for. So we'll often see that stored in the chest in that type of pressure.
Yeah, and then you look at the upper belly, if there's like a upper belly punch or a squeezing, it might feel like you're powerless or you don't have any control over a situation. You just feel unempowered.
Yeah. And people might describe that as nausea or like heat or churning or like writhing in the upper belly. So that's
Mm.
often how that might feel there. And then we've already discussed, like in the low belly, it might feel heavy, like a heaviness or an achiness, pressure, or there may be cold, like a cold emptiness in the low belly, which is the abandonment or disconnection or rejection or sense of aloneness that people will often feel.
yeah, hollow sometimes in that area. And then as we get more into to the root or the base of the spine, sometimes they'll feel stuff in their hip area. It might be one side of that hip area or the base of their spine or the back, sometimes down into the genitals as well as
Mhm.
pressure. And really just being afraid to feel those sensations their whole life and taking them in to get into those trauma packets and open that up.
And sometimes the root might be felt as palpitations, like in the upper chest, too. Like if there's a lack of rooting, and then that will show up as anxiety, there will be like movement in the upper chest that they'll label as anxiety. But, for us, anxiety is like an umbrella term for these sensations. And different people feel anxiety with different sensations in different parts of
Mhm.
their body. And so, what one person's anxiety is like, I can't control or get it right. Another person's anxiety might be, I don't feel safe. And so that's why it's when someone says I have anxiety or unworthiness, I'm like, okay, let's define that a little bit further. Let's go into the body. So soul retrieval will start with a current life issue. We'll go into those sensations that we've just named. And when we sit in that sensation, that's where body memory will reveal itself. It's not like the mind has to search for a memory from the thinking brain or the memory stores in the mind. It's actually the body memory that will kind of bubble into the present moment to show us exactly what the issue is. And it may not line up exactly or make sense. And this is where the person, when they're receiving this inner alignment soul retrieval, they might be like, well, this doesn't make sense. And it doesn't matter if it makes sense. It makes sense in the end, or it makes sense by the practitioner, because we can see the patterns in the present moment, and we can usually start to see really what the root is when the body shows us the memory. And usually it's anywhere from 4 to 15, 16, really anywhere in childhood up until the brain was developed, 20 years old sometimes.
Yeah, and often not what you've thought in your therapy sessions or what you've analyzed, even if there was a big T trauma and there was abuse, and you feel like it must be that abuse and that abuser, but sometimes it's literally the fact that nobody believed me, or there was nobody to tell, or nobody there for me versus the actual act. Sometimes it is that. But what we come in with mentally thinking isn't relevant here. The body has that wisdom. The body does keep the score, and the body reveals it from the sensations. And we can always trust that, always.
And you said this before, but it's worth mentioning again. There's people that have come into this work that have done a lot of inner work in whatever mode they've done it in. And so, like you said, they might feel something, I don't know, well, this doesn't make sense to me. It's not connected. Or they might already have a childhood story that they've connected, but it's not that one. And so, really just being open to what is there and what's showing up, because the body will always tell you exactly what it needs to heal. The exact thing that it needs to heal, the body will present that.
Yeah, it's so true. So what's fascinating, and honestly, I've done probably thousands of these sessions, and it never ceases to amaze me how sacred it is to enter into these body memory experiences with people. I think that's really important to mention. And I know that we all share that once you get into body memory, a lot of people project, oh, I don't want to relive that experience, or they imagine that they're going to have all those negative feelings and thoughts. But what's absolutely fascinating to me is the body memory. When we get in there into that terrible situation, the body memory lives in the what is, and it's the mind that creates the fear and the thoughts and the negative emotion. And because we're not in the mind got kind of left on a shelf and checked at the door. Because we're not there anymore, when we go into the body, if they're truly, we almost have to like push them into the body memory. And that's a whole experience of like, it's kind of like a balloon or a ball that wants to come to the top of the water. The process of really actually getting into that body memory together is in of itself an actual process. So it's an embodied what is experience of the past in the present. It takes a while for someone to even understand how to get into that and stay in that, because the mind is so pervasive and has been like running the show for so long. But once we get in there, even if it's a big T trauma experience, typically what's there as we get in is this presence, because there's a witnessing. We are in there together, and there's this witnessing. And by witnessing alone, by bringing awareness and presence into this childhood experience, even if we don't do what we call the fancy footwork and all of the stuff in there, by just stepping in and embodying the childhood experience, brings in so much presence and so much awareness and so much just loving presence. Is all like, the power of the presence, the power of now, as Eckhart Tolle has taught us, to be so deeply present to that 8-year-old's experience of that really horrible thing is in and of itself incredibly sacred and healing.
Yeah, I love how your voice like stepped down, because it is like sacred, it is vulnerable, it is intimate, and it is so quiet. We think it's going to be re-traumatizing and loud, and it is exactly as your voice stepped down. It is intimate and vulnerable, and there is so much there in that moment. It's very simple. It's not what we've talked about and made the story about. And so there's not only healing, but there's a deep, deep intimacy that happens in that moment for the person to experience that makes tears come into the back of my eyes. Like, I can't describe it, but the way that you step down, just the feeling of being in there is just an absolute privilege and an honor to be able to witness somebody healing themselves, really.
And I think that's, as a practitioner, that's how you know you're there, because you just feel this space that you enter of stillness, from the client. Like, us as a practitioner, we can feel it, but we can feel the client dropping into themselves, and you come at this active emotion and sensation, and as soon as you hit that trauma packet and that memory, rather, you know you're there, because the client gets still. You feel the stillness, and it's just in this place of like a dance.
And it feels like the deep sea. Like it's almost like when you're talking about the issue, you're up in the waves and you're getting kind of beaten up in the waves. And then when you actually help that person get into the deep sea, there's so much, as you said, stillness and sacredness and spaciousness in that second dimension space. And typically the person's really never hit that space. And so pretty immediately they can feel the healing sensation that lives in that dimension by entering into it themselves. So it's sacred for us as practitioners because it's like going into sacred ground. But then for the person who's meeting themselves for probably the very first time in 50, 60, 70 years, to be in that space with that part of themselves, that 8-year-old part, that 15-year-old part, is just healing, even if that's all they do. Not that that is all they do, but it's just, I think it puts into practice so much of what all the beautiful teachers that are here, Ram Dass, Eckhart Tolle, Gabor Mate, IFS by Richard Schwartz. There's so many really amazing teachers in this day that are talking about presence. But when you take presence and actually bring it deep into the trauma space in the body, that's where the miracles happen. And I'm not saying magic because it ain't no magic. It is like pure divine blessing that occurs.
I was thinking about what that might feel like if you didn't know how to describe it. And this isn't at all similar, but it maybe gives people a little entry point. It's like when you leave a concert or something and you get into your car and there's just nothingness. It's a little bit like that, but in the physical body, which is like 100 times more depth.
Right. Like not having chaos. It's like, oh, there's no chaos.
Like, oh,
I'm free. I'm safe.
yeah.
I'm good. I'm worthy here. I can feel love, and therefore there is love. It's like everything that we've been searching for and grasping for here in the fourth dimension, that noise goes away and you're in this quiet and peace that we've been searching for. And a lot of people can get that in the upper dimensions of consciousness. So if the fourth dimension is where the problems are, people can go into transcendental meditation or go into their practices and reach that peace up here in fifth dimension, sixth, seventh, eighth dimension consciousness through the spiritual practices. But this is different. This is like going into the body and being able to create that in your nerves or in your belly, which is really bridging all of the practices, those spiritual practices, bridging them from this space of kind of getting out of yourself and really anchoring all of that spiritual love, peace, joy, happiness into the body. And when that happens, it's profound. You don't ever forget that experience, that body-based peace.
Yeah, and it's that gentleness and that sacredness that doesn't re-traumatize, like the talking about it and the digging it all up and the story of it. It really, it becomes such a peaceful experience that there isn't that noise and that re-traumatization and really the experience of like, I've got me. I needed the relationship to change and the job to change and my kids to behave and more money in my bank account. And it's like, I'm good. I've got me. Boom.
It really is the aloe on the wound.
Yeah.
And it feels like that long after you come out of it, which I know we're not at that point yet, but it's true.
It is. It has staying power. It actually also gives you an awareness of like, oh, this peace and this love and all of this stuff that we know, it does exist within me. Like it's here. It was in me. The relief is deeper in me. And that when you actually give someone that experience of themselves, and they just want more of it. And so that's why we do this for 8 weeks, right? Because we're paving the pathway, so it's a well-worn pathway into this space, so we can empower people to be able to re-enter this space and process whatever's showing up. And that's a really big tenet of our work, is empowering people to be able to eventually do this for themselves. I often say it's kind of like we got 5 feet of snow and we have a snowblower, and we need to take like a few trips in with the snowblower to clear the path, so people know how to get into this part of themselves, so that they eventually can get into this second dimensional space whenever they need to or want to.
I think that is the biggest gift of this program, and it's the biggest reason why I'm absolutely passionate about it, because I have not seen another program that has this much in it in 8 weeks that teaches you truly how to heal yourself for the rest of your life. There's nothing else you need, and there's nothing outside of you that you need. And you know how to do it because you've been practicing it and rewiring it for 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And this deep soul retrieval process is excavating that root cause and helping you to, like you said, unravel the tin foil, get rid of the tin foil, and open up the gift and the healing within yourself. And you get empowered to do that with this work.
It's true. So then once you get into the trauma packet and you're there, we're not going to go into all the details because there's 11 steps of the soul retrieval process, and we're working every layer of the body. But essentially, once we get into the body memory, there's going to be that 8-year-old, 10-year-old who is not okay in a moment, and who was not getting their needs met, and who was struggling. And so when we get into that space, we're looking at emotionally, what is this part of this client? What is this part needing emotionally? And usually it's some flavor of love. I need to feel safe. I need to feel connected. I need to feel like I matter. I need to feel loved, right? So it's essentially what flavor of love, like what is needed. And only that 8 or 10-year-old self really knows what's actually needed, because they're the one that went through that experience. And this is not role playing, and it's not, there's a lot of stuff that happens in 4th dimension in the healing world. This is truly staying in the experience of the child's self, determining and being able to get that emotional need met. And so emotionally, we're meeting the need. That child is meeting the need. And then mentally, thought-wise, like what 6-year-old thoughts are there that may not have the whole picture? So we're bridging the adult mindset or the adult consciousness or the millions of podcasts or whatever it is that the adult already knows, that gets bridged in. It's like, oh no, it's not that mom doesn't care. It's that mom has 6 other kids and is really depressed and struggling, right? So there's usually some level of awareness on the mental layer of the body that an understanding is created or sets in during the trauma packet. And then spiritually, typically if someone is in fear, they feel very alone. There's not a lot of divine sacred presence. And so this is where divine or sacred, whatever that is, divine light, or if they have a religion, the client has a religion, then usually someone from that religion is there. And we're able to facilitate the spiritual experience in that old trauma experience. And that usually is very healing as well. And again, it's not the practitioner creating anything. This is what will naturally start to happen as we give the empowerment to the client to be able to work themselves through that experience. And so we've got new experiences of, instead of fear, we've got love seeping in, we've got new thoughts, we've got a new spiritual experience. The nervous system is becoming regulated in the trauma packet. There's new energies and energetic processing in that child's body. And every layer of the body, the awareness, the bliss, the emotional love, the thoughts, everything is starting to come back on board in a way. right? So that this fragmented experience that's kind of been creating a lot of noise and has had a life of its own is now kind of like a lotus starting to relax and open and re-experience in this new way, not with the mind on board at all. And that new experience of the old situation creates a whole new set of auto-associated, neurosynaptically wired up experiences. And the aha, or the experience of love, is usually, I don't want to say just as powerful as the trauma when it's set in, but it can be a very powerful experience that gets then wired up in a new way as a positive, loving, divine, sacred, healing experience. And so this old experience that was all bottled up with fear now really has awareness and understanding and love at the core of the experience. So it can't reactivate into the present moment in the same
Mhm.
way because it's fundamentally changed. And that's really powerful that all of this has happened and we haven't even done soul retrieval yet. So that's why soul retrieval is kind of a misnomer. It's kind of like one of the last steps, but it does characterize this experience because once this 8-year-old has finally healed and has new consciousness and awareness and new understanding and feels safe and feels loved, once that happens, that then can be reintegrated into the adult body and experience. It's like that which was once unsafe and scared now feels strong and powerful and loved and can really reintegrate into the adult's consciousness, the adult feeling, the adult nervous system. And that's the soul retrieval aspect of the experience, which is a reintegration into this current present moment.
I think it's important to mention too, in the trauma packet, in the memory that comes up, we're not changing the trauma. We're not changing what happened. We're not rewriting history. We're just going back into what is and healing at that place. I think that's important to mention
Yeah. So
too.
the characters aren't changing what they're doing. The mother's not acting different. We're not rewriting or rescripting or anything. We're actually building capacity or sovereignty or spaciousness or whatever that need is without changing the external situation. And once that reintegrates in, what that does is when we go back into the original trigger of I walked by the building, okay, well, now if you try on what it feels like to walk by the building, what's there? And typically what's there are feelings of safety or of I am a good person or I'm not triggered by the building or whatever original piece is, it just feels differently now from this reintegrated, healed trauma packet. There's new thoughts of like, oh, they were doing the best they could. Or there's new compassion of like, oh, that poor person. Instead of feeling victimized, now I feel like, oh, I can see them. I can see what their issue is. Or there's new feelings of safety or, oh, that doesn't affect me. It doesn't even touch anywhere in me. Or there's this sense of warmth or tingling that stays in the body. So when we recheck it in the end, there's a whole new set of embodied responses, which allows the person to build and experience a whole new neural network, a whole new set of synapses, a whole new experience of a new body chemistry, of safety chemistry or peace chemistry instead of anxiousness or I'm a bad person neurochemistry. And that is really profound.
Yeah. And there's new sensations that get wired up now. So there's a whole new, like Kim said, with that integration, this whole new set of sensations. And then that gets wired up and that changes how it got wired up originally without changing anything that actually happened.
One of my peers had said, when I went into this program, that my life was full of anxiety, crippling anxiety. And she said, after 8 weeks, absolutely nothing in my life changed, but everything changed. I was a different person experiencing the same life, and it was a brand new life. It was such a beautiful way to put it.
So nothing in the physical realm changed, but
Nothing. Yeah.
the person's experience was brand new.
Yeah, and the storms will still come, right? Life still brings us situations and experiences that are hard and painful. And there's this, I've got me. I'm safe and I'm good and I've got me and I've got tools and I know how to plow my own snowbanks and I'm good and I've got me. And then the storms of life come and there's more preparation and more groundedness and more sovereignty. Life changing.
Yeah. Yeah, what a gift. What a gift to do this as a practitioner, and what a gift it is to actually know that part of ourselves. And that's how we kind of stay at the eye of the storm when, the pandemic hits, or when other things start going chaos in the world. It's that signal that there's this really beautiful, grounded, safe space within us that we can always go into. Like the waves are in the surface, but we know now we can dive underneath those waves to create that within ourselves through this process of journeying deep within the body. And then we start to feel good in our bodies more regularly. Or when we don't feel good, we know what we need to do in order to process a stored vibration or even a current situation that's really bothering us. We know how to work it in a way that's less surface level and more within the profound depth. So thank you for being able to help give words to this really extraordinary process that we have the privilege to experience. In the next episode, we'll hit the next pillar. It's hard to stop here because really, once you have this new neurosynaptic setup in your body, you can still trigger into the old pattern because the brain and the body had been wired for 40 or 50 years in the old pattern experience. So next episode, we're going to talk about what it is to rewire the 6 layers of the body to be able to sustain the healing of the soul retrieval process. Thank you so much, Laura and Misty, for coming back and talking about this process. I'm so grateful for your work in the world and for making such a profound impact in so many people's lives. Namaste to everybody. Many blessings and have a great week.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Inner Alignment podcast. If you're ready to dive deeper into your anxiety or depression healing process, learn more about our 2-month Inner Alignment healing program. The healing program addresses trauma on all 6 layers of the body, and the program has been successful for over 400 participants. If you're feeling ready to join the community of healers who provide this sacred and profound healing work in the world, maybe it's time to become an Inner Alignment practitioner. If you think this is your dharma or your life purpose, be in touch. Find out more at KimberlyBeekman.com.